By the morning of the third day, the three legions had been reduced to scattered remnants of a desperate mob. The roar of panic filled the ravine, swallowing the officers' commands and leaving the men to die in isolation. The Germanic warriors fought with ruthless efficiency. The jaws of the trap were closing, systematically erasing 20,000 men from the finest military machine on earth. In the center of the collapse, Publius Quintilius Varus saw his cavalry deserting the column. Varus understood the mathematics of the moment. The column was broken. The eagle standards were surrounded. The extraction route was blocked by a wall of earth and timber the enemy had built days ago. Varus knew what fate awaited a captured general. He unsheathed his sword, looked at the grey sky one last time, and chose death over chains. The governor of Germania ended his command. The fate of the 17th, 18th, and 19th legions was sealed. The liquidation of 20,000 men began with the lie that led them into the trees. The Roman Empire believed Germania was already conquered. They believed the tribes were pacified, the taxes were due, and the Rhine River was no longer a defensive border. But the geography was unforgiving. The Rhine splits the region in two. To the west lay the Roman province of Gaul, a land of roads, cities, and safety. To the east lay Germania, a dense wilderness of forests and swamps. Rome had spent 20 years fighting to annex that forest, and they assumed the victory was finally total. Publius Quintilius Varus was a general by rank, but he governed as a peacetime magistrate. He was a man sent to organize a province, not fight a war. He brought 3 legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, deep into the territory of the Cherusci, a powerful Germanic tribe, to collect tribute and settle legal disputes. These were heavy infantry units designed for open field combat, where they could deploy into checkerboard formations and grind the enemy down with superior engineering. Commanding the auxiliary cavalry was a man Varus trusted implicitly, Arminius. Born a prince of the Cherusci tribe, Arminius had been taken to Rome as a child hostage to ensure his father's loyalty. Now, that father, Segamer, rode with the army too, dining at Varus's table as an honored guest. Varus viewed Arminius as the bridge between the civilized world and the barbarians, the ultimate proof that the empire could tame the north. He saw Arminius as a triumph of assimilation, not as the architect of his destruction. On September 6th, 9 AD, Arminius brought a report to Varus. He claimed a rebellion had broken out to the north. Dealing with the rebellion would pull the army off its westward course. Arminius suggested a detour. He promised a shortcut through the forest that would allow the legions to suppress the rebellion and still cross the river to safety before winter. It meant marching a column that stretched for 9 miles through dense, unmapped woodland. Varus gave the order to turn north, and 20,000 men marched off the road and into the darkness of the Teutoburg Forest. Arminius requested permission to leave. He told Varus he would rally friendly tribes to the Roman cause. Varus agreed. Arminius rode into the trees. He did not rally allies for the empire. He rallied a coalition to crush its presence east of the Rhine. He united the Cherusci, the Marsi, and the Bructiri, fierce rival Germanic clans who suspended their own blood feuds for the chance to drive the Roman invaders out of their homeland. For the first few hours, the enemy was the terrain itself. A violent storm swept over the region. The temperature dropped. The dirt tracks dissolved into mud that gripped with heavy suction. The attack began at the tail of the column. Stragglers, supply handlers, and isolated patrols simply vanished. There was no great battle cry yet, just the silence of men being pulled into the foliage. Then the storm intensified. The wind howled through the canopy, snapping heavy oak branches that crashed down onto the marching soldiers. The Romans viewed this as an omen. The Germans viewed it as air support. By late afternoon on the first day, the column entered a narrow ravine, and the hillsides erupted. Thousands of Germanic warriors hiding in the undergrowth unleashed a volley of javelins. The legionaries tried to form a testudo, the tortoise formation, but the trees were too thick, the ground was too uneven. The Germans charged down the slopes. They used hit-and-run tactics. They sprinted in, struck at the Romans, and vanished back into the woods before the heavy infantry could counterattack. Varus realized the danger. He ordered the army to halt and build a fortified camp. That first night, the survivors huddled behind a hastily dug earthwork. They burned their wagons. They destroyed anything that slowed them down. They listened to the sounds coming from the darkness. The Germans were celebrating. They were chanting to their gods, and they were interrogating the prisoners they had taken during the day. The night carried sounds from the forest that no one could ignore. This was psychological warfare. The legionaries knew what awaited them if the line broke. Sleep was impossible. At dawn, the Romans abandoned their supplies and hurled themselves north, desperate for open ground. But the forest offered no relief. For 2 days, the column was eroded by unseen attackers until the exhausted remnant marched into a geographical funnel. The path led them between a steep hill and a vast, impassable bog. This is the Kalkriese Narrows. Arminius had prepared the battlefield. On the hillside, the Germans had constructed a camouflaged wall of compacted earth and timber. It ran parallel to the Roman path, stretched out for over a quarter of a mile. As the Romans entered the gap, the Germans manned the wall. They stood on top of the rampart, safely out of reach, and rained stones and spears down on the packed column. The Romans were trapped. On one side was the wall. On the other was the black swamp. The discipline finally cracked. A group of Roman cavalry tried to storm the wall. The horses panicked in the tight space. They trampled their own infantry. The Germans opened gaps in the wall, surged out to bring down the horses, and then retreated back to safety. Varus's misplaced trust in Arminius wasn't the only reason for the Roman catastrophe. The legions were outmaneuvered by physics. Heavy armor sank in the mud, bowstrings snapped in the rain. The Roman line was compressed and paralyzed. By the third afternoon, the battlefield had become a prison. The cavalry had fled. The infantry was pinned between the enemy wall and the great swamp. The strategic map had shrunk to a dead end. Varus looked at the disintegration of his command and made his final choice. After Varus's death, the command structure evaporated. Some soldiers followed his example. Others surrendered, hoping for mercy that would not come. The rest fought back-to-back in small clusters until they were overwhelmed by the sheer mass of the tribesmen. The killing continued until nightfall. The forest floor was carpeted with the dead. The rain finally washed the mud from their armor, revealing the silver and gold decorations of the emperor's own legions, now sinking into the peat. The accounting of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest is absolute. 3 entire legions, nearly 20,000 men, were erased from the roster of the Roman army. The 17th, 18th, and 19th numbers were never used again. They were retired in shame. Arminius sent Varus's head to the king of the Marcomanni, a powerful Germanic tribe with which he sought an alliance. But the king did not want to provoke Rome, so he forwarded Varus's head to Emperor Augustus, who had it buried in the family mausoleum. The psychological impact on Augustus was permanent. The historian Suetonius writes that for months, the emperor would scream, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." Rome abandoned the dream of conquering Germania. They pulled back to the Rhine. They built forts, walls, and watchtowers. That river became the cultural and political fault line of Europe for the next 400 years. Because of 3 days in the mud, the Latin language stopped at the Rhine. The Augustan doctrine of perpetual expansion was shattered and discarded. marking Rome's transition from a conquering power to a state defined by its borders. One man's trust in the wrong advisor changed the trajectory of human history, and it proved that even the greatest empire on earth is only as strong as the ground it stands on.